blessed good morning to those who can join us here for reading number 17 from the great work by St. Robert Bellarmine, Cardinal, Bishop, great theologian, Doctor of the Church, canonized saint. His work is called Live Well, Die Holy, and what he's doing is he's now going through the sacraments and explaining how the sacraments, in fact, have an effect upon our ability to live well and die holy. Presently, he's describing holy orders, which will not apply to almost everyone that's listening directly, but indirectly, it does apply because it gives us a high appreciation of the priesthood, clerical orders generally, and the great respect with which we should venerate priests because of their high office. We can recall, for instance, that because their person is made sacred, that to strike a priest incurs the penalty of excommunication. Now, this does not apply to a priest who happens to be attacking you. You absolutely have the right to do whatever is necessary to defend yourself. Nevertheless, if you just go out of your way to strike such a person that is sacred in their person, that does incur ipso facto excommunication. Next, he's talking about what the term cleric means, because that's what happens to a person who enters holy orders. They become a cleric, and he explained the very meaning of the word cleric. And it's very interesting. The word cleric means inheritance. Now, who would have guessed that? The Latin is sors, S-O-R-S. The Greek, I'm not going to attempt to pronounce. But nevertheless, those words mean inheritance. So let's pick up where we left off in that regard. It's talking about those who have the Lord for their inheritance. But he who hath the Lord for his inheritance ought to so conduct himself, that he may possess the Lord, and may be possessed by him. And he that possesses the Lord, and says with the prophet, quote, "The Lord is my portion," end quote, can possess nothing out of God, which means nothing except God. But if he have anything beside God, the Lord will not be his portion. As, for example, if he possess money, gold, silver, land, various goods, the Lord, his inheritance, will not deign to be with these other portions. Thus, St. Jerome, if we read his whole epistle, we shall find that great perfection is required of clerics. St. Bernard comes next. He not only approves the language of St. Jerome, but he sometimes uses his words, although he does not mention his name. Thus he speaks in his very long sermon on the words of St. Peter, quote, "Behold, we have left all things," end quote, which occur in the Gospel of St. Matthew. A cleric, he says, who has any part with the world will have no inheritance in heaven. If he possess anything beside God, the Lord will not be his inheritance. And a little below he proceeds, declaring what a cleric can retain of church benefices, which means the payments that they get from the church. Not to give the property of the poor to the poor, is the same as the crime of sacrilege. Whatever ministers and dispensers, not lords and possessors, receive out of church property beyond mere food and clothing is, by a sacrilegious cruelty, taken from the patrimony of the poor. Thus St. Bernard perfectly agrees with St. Jerome. The ceremony of putting on the white surplice follows with these words of the Apostle, "Put on the new man, who, according to God, is created in justice and holiness of truth." It is not sufficient for clerics not to be in love with riches. Their life must also be innocent and without stain, because they are dedicated to the ministry of the altar, on which is immolated the Lamb without spot. Now, to put on the new man means nothing else than to cast off the ways of the old Adam, who has corrupted his way, and put on the new Adam, that is, Christ, who, being born of the Blessed Virgin, pointed out a new way in justice and holiness of truth, which means not only in moral justice, but also in the most perfect and supernatural holiness, such as Christ showed himself to us, who, according to St. Peter, did no sin, neither was guile found in his mouth. I should give a definition of guile. Guile is duplicity. It is basically talking out of both sides of your mouth, such as we often hear spoken of with politicians. So, for instance, Christ did no sin, neither was guile found in his mouth. Would that many clerics were to be found now, who, clothed in their white surplice, might show it in their life and manners. In short, another office of clerics is to assist with devotion, reverence, and attention at the divine sacrifice, in which the Lamb of God is daily sacrificed. I know that there are many pious clerics to be found in the church, but I not only know, but I have often seen many assisting at the altar of the Lord with roving eyes and improper demeanor, as if the service were a mean and common thing, and not most sacred and terrible. And perhaps the cleric is not so much to blame as the priest himself, who sometimes says Mass in such a hurried manner and with so little devotion as to seem not to be aware of what he is doing. Let such as these hear what St. Chrysostom says on this matter. At that time, angels surround the priest, and the whole heavenly powers sing aloud and gather round the altar in honor of him who is immolated thereon. This we may easily believe when we consider the greatness of the sacrifice. St. Gregory also thus speaks in the 4th book of his Dialogues. Who amongst the faithful can hesitate in believing that at the moment of immolation, when the priest pronounces the word, the heavens open and choirs of angels descend, that heavenly things are joined with earthly, visible with invisible. If these words be seriously pondered upon, both by priest and cleric attending upon him, how is it possible that they can act as they sometimes do? ? What a sorrowful and deplorable spectacle would it be, could the eaves of our soul be opened, to see a priest celebrating, surrounded on all sides with choirs of angels, who stand in wonder and tremble at what he is doing, and singing spiritual canticles in admiration, and yet to behold the priest in the midst, cold and stupidly inattentive to what he is about, not understanding what he says. And so he hurriedly offers the Mass, neglects the ceremonies, and, in fact, seems not to know what he is doing. In the meantime, the cleric looks here and there, or even keeps talking to someone. Thus is God mocked. Thus are the most sacred things despised. Thus is matter offered to heretics to scoff at. And since this cannot be denied, I admonish and exhort all ecclesiastics that being dead to the world, they live for God alone, not desiring an abundance of riches, zealously preserving their innocence, and assisting at divine things with devotion, as they ought, and endeavoring to make others do the same. Thus will they gain great confidence with God, and at the same time fill the Church of Christ with the good odor of their virtues. I'll stop the reading at this point, but this point does need to be commented upon because we're in a terrible catastrophe in the church right now, where solid catechism is not taught, where solid doctrine is passed over, where people are allowed to marry without proper examination as to whether or not they truly have the Catholic faith. And if one party does and one does not, that will ultimately lead to a catastrophe in the upraising, disciplining, and teaching of the children who are to inherit it, the faith. That is the very purpose they're being brought into the world, is to make more Christians for the world. And if they be malformed in the faith, what a horror that could be. So there are many problems, and I think a big part of it does go back to what was mentioned just in this last reading. Listen to this. Thus is God mocked. Thus are the most sacred things despised. Thus is matter offered to heretics to scoff at. To scoff at. What we're talking about here is also a scandal. A scandal is something which prevents someone from believing. And it brings forward the question, is it possible that these clerics and priests are unaware that their hastily saying Mass is a scandal? It would appear they are unaware from my observations of many years. And so this is indeed a terrible thing. So I want to encourage priests to please do as St. Robert Bellarmine says. Slow down. Pray as Padre Pio prayed. His Mass can be found on YouTube. The last one of his life was recorded and can be seen on YouTube. Pray the words of the Mass at the same speed with which he said them. It will only take about an hour without the sermon. And when there are so many other things that are going on, why not spend an hour on that which is most important? I'm already asking people to spend 2 hours saying 15 decades of the Rosary, fully 1/8 of their day, for those that can afford to do so. On Sunday, should the Mass itself, excluding the sermon, not take 1 hour? Is that too much to ask of people? Will they complain if the priest is truly reverent? If he's found weeping at the consecration because he's in love with God? I have never seen this in my entire life. I'm sad to say. They used to wear something on their left sleeve called a maniple. Some say that it was originally to wipe away sweat from their brow. I find this to be unlikely. I think it might have been used for that purpose, but I believe it was created for another purpose that I read, and that it was to wipe away the many tears that the priest would say during Holy Mass. This is clearly from another time, another era. There were certainly priests that did. Padre Pio was one of them. The Curé of Ars, certainly another. And we should not just be able to count them on one hand, however. This is something that should be common. It should be common. If someone is found weeping at Mass, they're looked upon as a freak. They think there must be something really wrong with that person. However, the priest should ask himself, why do I not do so at the consecration? That's the better question to be asked, don't you think? Let us encourage our priest in a gentle way to slow down, letting them know that we would be happy if they did so. We would profit greatly from their doing so. Many of them, I think, are afraid to do so because they fear that their Mass attendance will go down, or that they will be questioned, or they will cause problems with somebody's schedule. These things can all be adjusted to accommodate better quality of devotion. That all said, I've already gone beyond the 15 minutes. I apologize for that, but this is a very important point, and if we want to restore the church, the ultimate point I wanted to make is that we need to start praying like we really mean it. We need to start praying like it actually is important. May I leave you with one question? Just what is more important? God bless you, and thank you for participating in this reading number 17 from Live Well, Die Holy.